15 years of the euro. We'll find out if the single currency was a jackpot for Europe or left a continent shortchanged. And as Britain begins the process of Brexit, we'll ask what another year of political turmoil will mean for the EU. I'm Martin Stamford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. 15 years ago, there were fireworks and celebrations across Europe as it welcomed the introduction of the euro. Nearly 340 million people across 19 countries use the single currency, but questions remain over its future. The monetary union has been close to collapse twice since 2008, and now a year of political uncertainty lies ahead across the continent. Insight's Tadhg Enright reports from the Irish capital, Dublin.
When Europe's major powers first came together, it was supposed to be just a single market. You could sell things across borders without tariffs. And when the euro was conceived, it meant you could do that with one kind of money, making it easier to trade without the volatility of currency fluctuations. But by the time of the euro's birth, it was a project as much, if not more, about politics rather than economics. It was bringing Europeans closer together, making them feel more related by putting the same money in their pockets.
I'm a big fan of the euro, want to stay in it. Life around Europe has become much easier.
I tend to only go to two places in Europe, and they are Sweden and the UK, neither which inconveniently uses the euro. So, but I was in Italy recently and went, oh, this is amazing.
Foreign companies and conglomerates coming over, they felt the most benefits, but the everyday grey people, we felt the most of the downturn on it.
Some, like Britain and Denmark, weren't so keen, and they stayed out. But anyone enthusiastic enough was brought on board, including Greece, for whom pesky fiscal rules about reining in public borrowing were conveniently ignored. The critics would say that the euro project was a bit rushed and they didn't think of all the pitfalls.
Well, the idea of the euro was first mooted in the 60s, so you had 10, 20, 30 years of planning. But of course, it does appear rushed from this perspective. I think the euro project is a little bit like people coming into a marriage on the basis of their age or their height. It makes for very nice wedding photos, but it doesn't really guarantee a happy ever after.
On New Year's Day in 2002, euro notes and coins were must-have items. The currency's hard launch, a real celebration, binding together then 11 and now 19 countries with one money and one interest rate.
I think the problem was that people didn't understand what was meant by economies coming together for all time from very different cultures and experiencing very different economic conditions.
In the euro's early years, while the world economy was riding the wave of a debt-fueled boom, everything felt very good, thank you. Germany was struggling though a bit, so the central bank set a low interest rate to give the currency's most important economy a boost. But that rate extended across the eurozone, making it easy and cheap to borrow money everywhere and storing up some nasty problems for the future. In 2008, the wheels came off the world economy. The collapse of the US bank, Lehman Brothers, was the climax of a generation of excessive risk-taking and Byzantine financial instruments. It sent the markets into a tailspin, and in Europe, the weakest started to fall. Greece had become addicted to borrowed money, and its cost of borrowing soared. It was the first Eurozone country to seek a bailout, followed swiftly by Ireland and Portugal. At this market in Ireland, they've experienced the boom time highs and the bailout lows of Euro membership.
I wonder, will the pressures of diverging economies, economic situations, how will that pan out over the next 20 years?
I think the southern states are really suffering from being tied to it. So again, I'd wonder, I think the euro will stay, but I'm not sure if everyone will stay in it.
How do you think history is going to remember how Europe did deal with those crises.
The verdict is already in some sense, when you look at the rate of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, 40 to 50% in Spain and Greece, above 30% in a range of other countries. That's telling you that something in the economic management is very wrong, and the austerity measures put in place at the start really made the crisis worse rather than better.
In the rush to save the euro, Europe cooked up all manner of complicated schemes to keep it afloat. Financial institutions were protected at all costs, even if ordinary people weren't. And long before Donald Trump was taken seriously as a politician, European austerity was helping to spawn its own breed of populist movements, such as Podemos in Spain. In Greece, Syriza threatened to take it out of the euro. And in Italy, the growing Five-Star movement has promised a referendum on membership of the euro if it's elected to government.
Unless we really get serious about integrating the European economy and growing together, it is a case of the politicians being dragged kicking and screaming, and really the next crisis and the crisis thereafter forcing their hand into measures that will preserve the euro.
Which brings us to today. The euro's been in circulation now for 15 years, and the European Union looks shakier than at any time in history. Greece went all the way to the edge, but stepped back into line. But could 2017 be the year when Italy tests Europe and the euro's limits for itself? Ty Genwright reporting for Insight in Dublin.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Eunice Goyes, an Associate Professor of Politics at Richmond University in London. 15 years and counting. Can this structure survive another year?
Well, that's a very good question. We do not know, but we've been, for the past 6 years, we've been hearing forecasts about how the euro is going to, we are witnessing the last days of the monetary union, and yet it's still there. If it is going to survive, it is going to survive at the expense of millions of people who are suffering as a result of austerity measures, of lack of investment that is happening, in particular in Southern Europe, but not only. The richer countries of the Eurozone are also suffering too. So that tells you something about how wrong the fundamental flaws of this incredible project that was put together 50 years ago.
Everyone's suffering, Eunice. Why keep it going?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question to be asked to, in particular, to Germany and France and the founding members of the monetary union, who created it essentially to create a political European project. It is not going according to plan. The monetary union has been created by politicians who had a very weak understanding of how economics works, and in particular by German politicians who believe that the 29 economies of the European Union would magically converge as a result of being part of the monetary union. Not all those 28 member states are part of the monetary union, but there's sufficient divergence between the Eurozone that has not been sorted out by the monetary union. In fact, throughout these 15 years, we haven't seen economic convergence, we've seen economic divergence. We've seen
the exact opposite of what its founding fathers wanted to happen.
Absolutely. But even the so-called dynamic capitalist economies of the North are suffering. On the other hand, the South, as the report has shown, in Southern Europe, the suffering is absolutely tremendous. 50% youth unemployment, 20% general unemployment in Spain and in Greece. This is not a recipe for success.
Well, they're not sustainable numbers, are they? And yet the political masters and the sentimental reason to try and bring Europe together still holds true so far. But we've got some other pretty existential conversations coming up with elections in France, where there's criticism of the Euro project, well, the European project, I should say, perhaps, rather than the currency itself, and Germany. Those two events this year could send further shockwaves over this.
They can, especially because we have a looming banking crisis in Italy that was caused by the referendum in Italy late last year. And the crisis in Greece is very far from being solved. We have, at the moment, there's a standoff between the IMF and the European institutions about what kind of demands they want to impose on Greece. And on the other hand, the Greek government is also refusing to impose more austerity.
Yeah.
The Europeans...
I don't understand that. Let's just pause on that, because I don't fully understand that. Greece was told you can have a bit more money if you do what you're told. Greece is not doing what she was told, and yet still's got the money.
But, well, that's a very simplistic way of putting it, because what was demanded of Greece was pretty, it was unreasonable. The demands that were put on Greece are unsustainable. The idea that Greece is going to be able to pay its debt, no economist in the world, no credible economist in the world believes that it's possible. The IMF has been insisting on some debt forgiveness for Greece. That's the only way to sustain the crisis.
Okay.
On the other
it's
hand,
a bad year to go to the German voters and say, let's forgive all the Greek debt, isn't it?
Especially because the way that the German government talks about this, they like to talk about it in Protestant terms. The sinners, Southern European sinners, we are those who are thrifty, hardworking, and so on. They have to be more like us. But in fact, the problems in Greece are not about the Greeks being lazy. There are fundamental problems in Greece, corruption, nepotism, and so on. But let's be honest too, the austerity measures that have been imposed by the Troika of the European Union, the IMF, and European Commission, plus the public spending cuts that have been imposed in Greece are not helping. They've made the problem worse. We reached a situation now where in Greece, hospitals do not have sufficient equipment, sufficient essential equipment to save people out of, save the lives of people of pretty ordinary diseases.
So we might see a further problem with Greece during 2017. We almost certainly see a problem with Italy. We've got the political instability of elections in France and Germany. The euro currency itself, now Britain will be never joined, but is also going to be stepping away from the European political dream. Can the currency actually survive? Or do you see, is anybody else queuing up to say, actually, I'm going to put my hand up here, I want to leave this euro thing?
I think this currency can only be sustainable in the long term if there are profound reforms to the monetary union. Okay. We have to have reforms in terms of the kind of fiscal targets that are imposed on the different member states. You also need to create a banking union, greater solidarity amongst the member states of the monetary union, and stop having the fetish about deficits that have creating so much harm to the Eurozone economies.
Well, there were some strict rules, weren't there, about deficits and the percentages of your GDP you were allowed to do.
Yes, exactly.
They've been flaunted by many members for
including
many
Germany.
Years. Including Germany, yes,
Germany.
one of the founding states. So why don't we just forget all of that? Is this what you're saying? We should just rewrite that stuff.
Absolutely.
Or say it never existed?
These rules are created for states that do not exist. These are rules created for the minimal state, the state who only invests in a police force and keeping law and order. The modern state invests in defense, which costs millions and millions and millions, healthcare systems, infrastructure, and so on. So we cannot, with the current rules, the modern states cannot invest because they will be constantly in breach of the rules imposed by the monetary union. And if they are constantly in breach, we are sending the wrong signals to the financial markets, who will punish any government for violating the rules that they themselves wrote. So the solution is actually rewrite the rules. Rewrite the rules to allow economic growth. Policies that actually look at the state as an actor that can create policies of economic growth and sustainable economic growth.
Spend more money, run up more debt. Is that what you're saying?
It's spending to invest. It's investing in infrastructure. This is the kind of investment that private actors are highly reliant on. How can you have functioning economies if governments are not investing in education systems? How can you have modern and functioning economies if you're not investing in the infrastructure that is required, from high-speed rail links to roads and so on? You cannot have that modern economy without state investment.
If you could look 15 years into the future, do you think the euro that we use today and those notes and coins, will they still exist?
It's a possibility, but so many other things can happen.
Pretty small one. Okay, stay with us, Eunice, because on Insight next, the future of the euro to the future of Europe. We'll discuss the beginning of Brexit.